All right, if you are a regular viewer of Fox, you know all about this Planned Parenthood stuff and the outrageous stuff that was said. But the fact of the matter is, if you searched around the dial and looked at the major news broadcasts, it has been barely mentioned at all. In fact, and I guess, Pim, we will show those numbers. They're a little hard to read. This graphic doesn't make it crystal clear. But the fact of the matter is, since this story developed on the 14th, it has been getting scant coverage on ABC News, 46 seconds, on NBC, a little north of 3 minutes, CBS, 7 minutes, 21 seconds. I stress, assuming each broadcast is about 22 minutes with commercials and everything, we've got 10 days. We've got 220 minutes of coverage. Now, look back at those numbers. So 220 minutes we're talking about. And in its totality, 46 seconds ABC, NBC a little over 3 minutes, CBS a little over 7 minutes. All right. It's a big story. That's a big weird, right? Now we have Richard Noyes with the Media Research Center, talk radio host Gina Loudon. That's pathetic, Gina. What do you make of it?
Pretty pathetic, but to be expected. When you look at the fact, Neil, that this is a top trending issue on virtually every social media. You can't get on social media without seeing this hashtag about Planned Parenthood selling baby parts, and they aren't bothering to cover it. It's no wonder, Neil, really, why their ratings are dropping pretty much like a donut in your coffee, Neil, when the rest of Fox is exploding.
That was not necessary, but I was getting where you were coming from. But, Rich, you helped provide these numbers, and thank God for your organization just to spell out. I always tell people, you can agree or disagree with the coverage and whether you get more coverage or less coverage, but this was a fairly big story showing some, hugely inappropriate, to put it mildly, comments, and yet it gets scant coverage. And I think why it's important to step back and look at the totality of that in terms of the total minutes of those broadcasts in that 10-day interval. It's not very promising.
No, and it's actually worse than you described it, because we included the network morning shows as well. So you've got, you're talking about closer to 60 hours of coverage.
Wow. Say that again. Say that again, Rich.
This includes the network morning shows today, Good Morning America, CBS This Morning, as well as the 3 evening broadcasts over a 10-day period. And you add it all up, it's about 11 minutes of coverage in, somewhere between 60 and 70 hours of coverage, minus all the commercials and cut-ins.
It's worse than I thought.
It's a much more pathetic showing. And, again, if this had been something that, a hidden camera expose of a CEO, if this had been a hidden camera expose of a conservative politician, you'd just be seeing a lot more of this. But this is a hidden camera expose of a liberal group that gets $500 million in federal money a year, and the networks just don't want to talk about it very much.
All my point is, I don't care what the networks talk about it, but prefer that they cover everything and be fair about it and devote the same amount of time to it. But I saw lately in this whole push for, getting rid of sanctuary cities, whether you're for or against sanctuary cities. This was in the works in the House for the better part now of 6 months, and it was called the Enforce the Law for Sanctuary Cities Act, H.R. 3009. Now, it was typically described in the press and the part of Democrats as the Donald Trump Act. In other words, just taking advantage of Donald Trump's late entry into the race, and to say this was all a boon and a recognition of Donald Trump, disparaging what was legislation in the works created by other people, had nothing to do with Donald Trump, and this was in the works long before there even was a Donald Trump in the race. But, Gina, I'm seeing that, and you would almost think as a passive reader, oh, this is a bone to the Donald Trump crowd and try to ease up here, when in fact had nothing to do with it. What do you think of that?
Yeah, it's humorous, Neil. Honestly, this will backfire on the lamestream alphabet soup media, just like everything else does.
Don't make the donut analogy. Don't go there, but finish that thought.
I went to soup, Neil. We've moved on to healthy things like soup. But I do think that this will backfire on them just the same way they tried to tag the Star Wars thing on Reagan. They're going to try to tag this on Trump, and he's going to turn it into the Midas touch, and it's going to be a cornerstone for him, which I know is an unintended consequence, because most things the media does these days don't make sense, and that's why they're losing such massive viewership. It's sad that a guy like, I'm glad Rich is gainfully employed, but it's sad that a guy like Rich even has to have a job in a free country with the First Amendment. Doesn't make sense.
Well, I'm glad that Rich does what he does, his organization does what it does, because even when they point out things that we miss or I miss, I think it's important to have someone watching us. And I think what I notice for this, Rich, is that there are some vested interest stories the media has and others that it just completely passes over.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, we The media say they're the watchdogs. Well, the watchdogs need a watchdog sometimes. But, when it comes to sanctuary cities, this was some of the networks, basically ABC, CBS, NBC. I went back and checked through Nexus. They didn't touch this story until this month with the Steinle murder. You got to go back to 2007 for a reference to sanctuary cities. It's just not on their radar screen. It's not a controversy to them. For them, it's the way the world should be.
Yeah, and one thing I'll leave you on this, guys, I wish I had more time to talk about it, but even in light of guests we've had on the show whose children were killed by illegals, they would try to thread the needle here to say, well, yeah, but those illegals were not in sanctuary cities, as if to say, all right, there's no story there. They were still illegals. They were still here when they shouldn't have been here, and they still killed people who should have not been in that position to be killed. So the sanctuary city was just a semantic argument, and a fatal one at that. Guys, I want to thank you both very, very much.